That moment when a brilliant product idea sparks its electric.
Right.
But then comes the big question, how do you actually bring that vision to life?
Right, without getting totally lost in a sea of complexity.
Exactly. And you're looking for knowledge, something thorough but, digestible, right? Well, let's get into it.
Yeah, because today we're laser focused on a really pivotal stage in that journey, the plan phase. We've gathered our resources, done the reading, and we're ready to break it down for you.
Okay.
Think of the plan phase as the crucial link transforming those initial exciting concepts, sometimes called the conceive phase, into real actionable strategies.
So it's where we move from just ideas to actual concrete steps.
That's it. It's where the rubber meets the road, so to speak.
Precisely. And our goal in this deep dive is to give you a solid grasp of the essential elements and activities that make up this plan phase. Consider this your streamlined guide, kind of a shortcut, to understanding this often pretty intricate stage.
Yeah, and it's important to understand that the depth and detail here can really differ.
Oh, definitely.
I mean, a nimble startup might have a more agile, maybe less formal planning approach compared to, say, a huge corporation launching something really complex.
And the industry pace matters too, right? Fast-moving tech versus maybe something more traditional.
Absolutely. But even with those variations, there are certain core activities that tend to pop up pretty much everywhere.
Okay, so what are those?
Well, within the plan phase, we typically see 4 main areas of activity unfolding, often kind of in parallel. Product definition, the project plan, marketing strategy, and the business case.
Got it. 4 key areas. So where should we start?
Let's start with product definition.
Okay, product definition. This really feels like the bedrock, doesn't it? It's all about getting absolute clarity on what we're actually going to build.
And it's heavily, heavily influenced by understanding genuine customer needs. You'll often find user experience professionals, UX folks, playing a vital role here.
Right, making sure we're not just building something, but building the right thing for the people who will actually use it.
Exactly. And what's fascinating here is how the initial idea of the target market, which might have been quite broad back in the conceive phase, becomes much more focused now.
So we're narrowing it down.
Yeah, we start creating really detailed profiles of our ideal users, who they are, what makes them tick, what problems they really face. And critically, this refinement isn't just guesswork. It's often backed up by more thorough market testing and validation.
Ah, so checking those initial assumptions.
Precisely. Do they actually hold true when we dig deeper?
Okay, and building on that deeper user understanding, we then define the actual product itself. This is where we take those high-level concepts and translate them into detailed requirements, right? Functional and system level.
Exactly. Think of a functional requirement as the user needs to be able to upload a profile picture. Simple enough.
Okay.
Whereas a system-level requirement might be something like the system must store those profile pictures securely and retrieve them efficiently. It's about the underlying mechanics.
Gotcha. So we're talking about getting specific on everything from how a user clicks around to how the back-end systems actually perform.
Precisely. We need to be really granular here. What specific actions will users take? What's the system going to do in response? What about those non-functional requirements, things like performance, security, maybe scalability, ease of use?
Those are always critical, but sometimes overlooked early on.
They are. And what will the user interface actually look and feel like? This level of detail isn't just for the engineers, though. It's absolutely essential for creating a realistic project plan down the line, and importantly, a dependable cost model in our business case.
Right. And the key output of all this detailing is often the product requirements document, the PRD.
The classic PRD, yes. This is often the central document outlining the product's functionality and those system-level qualities, those non-functional requirements we just mentioned.
Now, does the emphasis change depending on the type of product?
It does. For software, the focus is often heavily on features and functionality. For hardware, you're looking more at physical attributes, operating constraints, power consumption, that sort of thing.
And services.
For services, it's more about the processes, the workflows, maybe changes to the physical environment, or underlying IT architecture, even materials used in delivering the service.
Okay. But what about Agile? Doesn't that approach things differently?
Good point. There's definitely an alternative, especially popular in Agile software development. Instead of one massive formal PRD up front, you'll often find a product backlog.
The backlog, right.
Which is essentially a prioritized list. And the requirements are often framed as user stories.
I've heard that format. As a user type, I want to do something so that I get this benefit.
Exactly that. It keeps the focus squarely on user value. And as these stories get closer to actually being worked on, they get fleshed out with acceptance criteria, clear, testable conditions. Basically, how do we know when this story is truly done? You might also see things like use cases or even visual diagrams to clarify more complex interactions.
So whether it's a PRD or a backlog, prioritization is absolutely key. You can't build everything at once.
No way. So we often see methods like rating things high, medium, low, or maybe must-have, important, optional. Fairly straightforward.
Or some there's more complex methods.
Yeah, I've seen sophisticated decision matrices too, where you weigh different factors like strategic importance versus effort versus customer value to get a more nuanced ranking.
And in Agile specifically.
In Agile, that's often handled by stack ranking in the backlog, just one single ordered list. Top item is the most important, period. And a key benefit there is the flexibility to adjust those priorities between development cycles or sprints.
Makes sense. And this whole process of defining requirements, it's not done in a vacuum, right?
Oh, definitely not. It's usually very iterative. It involves multiple reviews with various stakeholders, engineering, marketing, sales, support, finance, you name it.
Lots of feedback loops.
Exactly. And crucially, this detailed definition, however you arrive at it, becomes the foundation for estimating the actual time and effort needed for development.
Now, it's interesting how the practicalities of planning can sometimes feed back into the definition itself. Like, you start planning the project based on the requirements.
And you realize, uh-oh, the initial scope is way too ambitious for the timeline or budget. Or maybe you uncover a technical risk you hadn't fully appreciated.
Right. So that can lead to some tough choices, forcing you to maybe revisit the requirements and priorities.
It's almost like a continuous negotiation, a feedback loop between what do we want to build and what can we realistically build.
Yeah. And this detailed product definition, as it evolves, can even ripple back and impact the original product concept itself, can't it?
It really can. As we get a clearer picture of the what and the how, we might realize that our initial assumptions about the value proposition or how we stack up against competitors, or even our pricing ideas from the conceive phase, well, they might need a rethink.
So you might need to update things.
Potentially, yeah. That initial market requirements document, the MRD, which outlined the market needs, it might get updated or even effectively superseded by this much more refined, validated understanding coming out of the plan phase.
Okay, so we've got a handle on what we're building. Now let's zoom in on the user experience, the UX, and the user interface, the UI. It's easy to mix these up or think UI is just the visuals, but UX is broader, isn't it?
You've hit on a really critical point there. UI, the visual design, the buttons, the screens, that's part of UX. But UX, user experience, encompasses the entire interaction a user has with the product.
The whole thing.
Yeah, from the very first time they hear about it to how they acquire it, maybe pay for it, install it, actually use it day to day, and even how they get support if something goes wrong. For many products today, especially digital ones, these stages are all deeply woven together.
Okay, so it's the total experience.
Yeah.
How do we actually design and test that? We can't just guess what users will like or find easy.
No, definitely not guesswork. We use a whole range of methods for modeling and testing the UX and UI. It can start really simply with low-fidelity prototypes. Think sketches on paper or basic wireframes.
And mapping out the flow.
Exactly, just to illustrate potential user flows and interactions quickly. Then, as ideas solidify, we progress to high-fidelity prototypes. These look and often feel much closer to the final product. Could be interactive software mock-ups or even physical models for hardware.
And the point of these is getting feedback.
Absolutely. These prototypes are invaluable. You put them in front of users, maybe in focus groups, or better yet, individual usability testing sessions, and you observe. You see what works, what confuses them. This feedback ensures the design is actually meeting user needs effectively. These mock-ups themselves can even become formal deliverables within the requirements.
That makes a lot of sense, getting something tangible, even if it's rough, in front of users early. And I know UX professionals also do a lot of upfront research before even sketching, right?
Oh yes, definitely. They conduct qualitative research, they look at demographic data, age, location, things like that, but also psychographic data users' attitudes, their beliefs, their motivations. Why do they do what they do?
Trying to get inside their heads a bit.
Kind of, yeah. To truly understand the target market segments and really inform the design direction, they also spend a lot of time interviewing stakeholders, potential buyers, and crucially, the actual end users. The goal is always to uncover those underlying needs and goals, not just surface level ones.
And this research feeds into?
It directly feeds into creating user personas, those representative archetypes of your key user types. It helps the whole team design with specific, albeit fictional, users in mind, rather than some generic user.
Okay, personas help focus the design. Then comes actually making sure the thing is usable. I've heard the term usability evaluation was the core idea there.
At its heart, usability evaluation is about making sure the product is easy to understand and use effectively. We're generally looking at a few key things. Is it learnable? Can someone figure out basic tasks the first time they encounter it?
Okay, learnability. What else?
Efficiency. Once they've learned it, can they perform tasks quickly? Is it memorable? If they come back after a break, can they still remember how to use it without starting over?
Important for occasional users.
Definitely. Is it free of errors? Do users make a lot of mistakes? And crucially, if they do make errors, can they easily recover? And then ideally, is it delightful? Is it actually a positive, maybe even enjoyable experience to use?
Those sound like goals every product should aim for. So how do we practically test for these things and improve the design?
The absolute key principle here is iteration. It's not a one-shot deal. You follow an iterative design approach, meaning you progressively refine the design based on feedback.
And the best way to get that feedback
is through usability testing with representative users, real people who match your target audience profile. The core process is actually quite simple. You ask users to perform typical tasks using your design, whether it's a paper prototype or a more finished version, and you just watch them.
Observe what they do.
Exactly. You note where they succeed easily and, crucially, where they struggle or get confused. Interestingly, research shows that even testing with a small number of users, say 3 to 5, especially in the early stages, can uncover a surprisingly large percentage, like 80% of the major usability problems.
Wow, just 3 to 5 people can find that much. That seems really efficient.
It is. It's one of the best ROIs in product development, honestly.
So any tips for conducting these tests effectively?
A few key things. It's crucial to test users individually, one-on-one, so they aren't influenced by others. And you need to let them work through problems on their own as much as possible. Avoid jumping in to help, because that biases the results.
Resist the urge to guide them.
Exactly. And here's a big one. Instead of doing one massive, expensive usability study right at the end when everything's built,
which sounds risky.
It is. It's far, far more beneficial to conduct numerous smaller, quicker evaluations throughout the entire design process. Make revisions based on the feedback from one round before you test the next iteration. Early design should be fast, cheap, and easy to change. That's the mantra.
Address issues early before they get baked in and become expensive to fix. Makes total sense. Are there other things to evaluate besides the new design itself?
Definitely. Before you even start designing the new experience, it's often incredibly valuable to evaluate the existing design, if there is one, or even your competitors' products.
See what works and what doesn't out there.
Precisely. What are the current pain points users have? What features do they actually like that you should maybe retain or improve upon? Field studies can also be great observing users in their actual environment, using the product naturally.
Okay, so evaluate the old, evaluate competitors, do field studies, then start prototyping the new ideas.
Right. Create prototypes. Again, they don't need to be perfect or time-consuming initially. Low fidelity is fine to start. Get them in front of users, gather that crucial feedback, refine, and repeat. You'll naturally progress from low-fidelity sketches or wireframes to more polished, high-fidelity prototypes over several iterations.
And maybe check against guidelines, too.
Yes. Inspecting the design against established usability heuristics or guidelines is also a good practice. And then, even after the final design is implemented in code, it's worth doing a final round of evaluation. Sometimes subtle issues pop up during development.
Good point. What about the number of users tested? Does that change?
Generally, yes. You typically start with those smaller groups, like 3-toes users, for early-stage, qualitative feedback to find the big problems. As the product matures and you move towards launch, you might increase the sample size if you need more statistical confidence in your findings or want to compare performance metrics.
This iterative approach to UX, constantly testing and refining, sounds absolutely vital for ending up with a product people actually find intuitive and, hopefully, enjoyable. Okay, one more key piece of product definition we need to touch on. The product roadmap. This always sounds very strategic.
It absolutely is. The product roadmap serves as a crucial bridge. It connects that high-level product vision and strategy, which we probably first articulated back in the conceive phase, with the very detailed, tactical product development projects we're planning now.
Okay, a bridge between vision and execution.
Exactly. It's particularly relevant for products that are developed and released incrementally over time, which is most software and many other products these days. Think of it as a visual plan, or sometimes a narrative, illustrating the steps we intend to take over time to achieve that overarching vision.
And it's not set in stone.
Definitely not. A good roadmap is a living document. It should adapt and evolve as business conditions change, as we learn more from customers, or as priorities shift internally.
So what does a typical roadmap look like? What kind of timelines are we talking about?
You'll often see it structured around maybe two main timeframes. There's the short term, which covers the planned releases that are either currently in development or have a high degree of certainty. This might span the next 2 to 4 development cycles, or maybe look out over a calendar year, or perhaps a rolling 12-month view.
The stuff that's pretty concrete.
Right. Then there's the longer-term view. This is more directional, less detailed. It outlines potential capabilities or themes we're considering beyond our immediate planning horizon, maybe 12 months out, or even further, depending on the industry.
And this longer view is more subject to change.
Much more so. It really depends on how the current projects pan out, how the market shifts, competitive moves, internal strategy changes. In industries with really long product life cycles, like maybe aerospace or pharmaceuticals, that longer-term view might stretch several years. But in fast-paced sectors like software, trying to predict specifics years out is, well, pretty difficult.
Okay. And what's the primary purpose of having this roadmap, especially the internal one?
The main internal objective is really about achieving organizational alignment, getting everyone development, marketing, sales, support, leadership on the same page about the direction and the priorities.
So it helps with planning.
Absolutely. It facilitates much better resource allocation and budget planning across the company. A well-defined internal roadmap will typically include things like a specified time frame, maybe key market events or deadlines that influence timing, the specific products or capabilities or sometimes themes planned for delivery over time, and often the associated development activities and rough resource needs.
It seems like defining the product in detail and outlining the project plan would heavily influence this roadmap. You might have a grand vision, but then reality hits.
You nailed it. Very often, the wish list of features and capabilities for the current planning window exceeds the team's realistic capacity, given the available time, resources, or budget.
Always more ideas than time.
Story of product management. So that's where prioritization becomes absolutely essential again. Those tough decisions about what makes it into the current release versus what gets deferred or pushed out, those decisions directly shape the future phases on the roadmap. They define what comes next.
Now, you mentioned earlier that sometimes an external version of the roadmap might be shared, particularly in B2B.
Yeah.
Why would a company do that?
Yeah, this happens quite often, especially when your product plays a really significant role in a customer's own operations or their long-term strategic plans. Maybe it's a platform they build on or something deployed widely across their organization.
So they have a vested interest.
A huge vested interest. They're making substantial investments, often long-term commitments. They need visibility into where your product is heading. They want some assurance that you're going to continue investing in it and evolving it in ways that align with their needs.
Okay, so how does an external roadmap typically differ from the internal one? Are they identical?
Oh, definitely not identical. External roadmaps almost always contain significantly less detail, and they're usually much less definitive, much more cautious about specific delivery dates. You don't want to make hard commitments externally that you might not be able to keep.
So more high-level themes than specific features sometimes.
Often, yes. A common format is a high-level overview of planned release milestones or major themes, maybe presented as slides during face-to-face meetings with key customers or partners. Sometimes, instead of a visual roadmap, it might be more of a high-level narrative document outlining the strategic direction.
And these aren't usually just posted publicly.
Rarely physically shared and almost always discussed under a non-disclosure agreement, an NDA.
Right. And what are the main benefits, the upsides, of sharing this forward-looking info externally?
There are several. It can really help demonstrate thought leadership in your market. It fosters strategic discussions with customers and partners about future possibilities, which is great for gathering valuable feedback.
Helps them plan too, right?
Absolutely. It assists customers with their own budgeting and operational planning if they know roughly what's coming. And, let's be honest, in competitive sales situations, having a clear, compelling roadmap can sometimes be a significant advantage in winning the deal.
That all sounds really positive. But I can imagine there must be potential pitfalls or dangers in sharing future plans like that.
Oh, absolutely. Product managers need to tread very carefully with external roadmaps. Number one, always include a disclaimer, something clearly stating that this reflects the current outlook and is subject to change without notice.
Because customers might see it as a promise.
Exactly. Customers can sometimes interpret even a high-level roadmap as a binding commitment. If market conditions force you to change direction later, it can lead to some very strained relationships.
Okay, disclaimer is key. What else?
Second, confidentiality. Roadmap information is inherently sensitive. You have to assume that even with NDAs, some elements might eventually leak to competitors, so be thoughtful about the level of detail you share.
Competitive intelligence risk.
For sure. And finally, you need to carefully manage how the roadmap is communicated and distributed through your sales channels. You don't want the sales team getting ahead of themselves and focusing all their energy on selling future, unreleased capabilities, sometimes called vaporware, at the expense of selling the product you actually have available today.
Right. Keep the focus on the present while providing a glimpse of the future. Those are really important caveats. Okay, fantastic. We've thoroughly dug into product definition. Now let's shift gears to the second major activity group in the plan phase. The project plan. What's the main focus here?
The project plan activities are primarily focused on figuring out how are we actually going to build and deliver this product we've just spent all this time defining. The core element here is usually the development plan, but depending on the product's scope and complexity, we might also need preliminary plans from other functional areas too.
And the development plan, this builds on those initial, probably pretty rough estimates we might have done way back in the conceive phase.
That's exactly right. Back in the conceive phase, we might have sketched out a preliminary development plan just to get a general ballpark sense of costs and timelines, but the product definition was still very high level then, so those estimates were, necessarily broad.
Educated guesses, maybe?
Pretty much. Now, with the much more detailed product requirements from the product definition work we just discussed, we can create a much more robust, much more reliable development plan. The goal is really to outline how the product, as defined in those requirements, will actually get delivered through a specific project.
Now, I know project management is a huge discipline in itself. Are we diving deep into Gantt charts and critical paths here?
No, we won't get lost in the weeds of specific project management methodologies. Our focus here within the context of the plan phase is more on the typical outputs of that development planning process. What information do we need to generate?
Okay, so what happens first?
Well, once the product requirements are reasonably complete, or sometimes this happens in parallel as requirements are being finalized, the development team can really start to assess the effort required to build the product.
And that assessment can vary wildly, I imagine.
Oh, massively. Is this product mostly leveraging existing code or technology? Or does it involve substantial new innovation, new platforms, maybe risky technical integrations? That drastically changes the estimation challenge.
So who typically pulls this development plan together? Is it the product manager?
Usually it's coordinated by a dedicated project manager, especially in larger orgs. It could also be a program manager if it's part of a larger initiative, or sometimes a functional lead within engineering.
Okay, so a PM type role.
Right. They collaborate closely with the development team using those detailed requirements to generate estimates for the effort and time needed. These estimates themselves can range from fairly high-level t-shirt sizes to very detailed task breakdowns, depending on the team's process and the organization's standards.
And where do the actual numbers come from?
Could be from the project lead or often from the individual engineers or developers who will actually be doing the work in specific areas. They usually have the best sense of the complexity involved.
Okay, so we have the estimates. What's the next step in putting the plan together?
With those effort and time estimates in hand, you can start developing a project schedule. This obviously needs to factor in resource availability, who is actually available to work on this, and when.
The reality check.
Exactly. The schedule might be a formal, detailed part of the development plan, or sometimes the plan just highlights the key milestones derived from that schedule. But crucially, the plan needs to account for more than just the core coding or engineering work.
What else needs to be included?
You absolutely need resources for setting up and maintaining development environments, for all the testing and validation work, alpha testing, which is usually internal user testing focused on finding bugs early, and beta testing, which involves external users giving feedback on a near final product.
Right, the different testing phases.
Plus resources for ongoing design and user research activities that might continue, and for creating all the necessary product documentation, technical documentation, maybe training materials. It all adds up.
It really sounds like a lot of different roles need to collaborate to bring a product to life successfully.
Oh, absolutely. A truly comprehensive development plan might involve input from or allocation of engineers, developers, project managers, program managers.
You mentioned program managers handle multiple projects.
Yeah, typically a program manager oversees a collection of related projects that contribute to a larger business objective, whereas a project manager focuses on a single, specific project deliverable.
Got it. Who else?
Architects, testers, UX/UI designers, technical writers, business analysts, maybe requirements specialists, the product managers or product owners themselves, scrum masters and agile teams, QA folks, database analysts. The list can get quite long depending on the product.
And all these people and activities cost money. How does that factor in?
Right. To support the overall business case and any budget requests, costs are derived directly from those resource estimates and the project schedule. But you also need to factor in other potential expenses.
Like what?
Things like purchasing new equipment or servers, maybe paying for outside consulting services, production tooling costs if it's hardware, creating physical prototypes, licensing specific development tools or software. All those ancillary costs need to be captured.
Okay, so just to recap the core pieces, what are the essential elements you typically expect to find baked into a solid development plan?
You'd definitely expect to see a list of the necessary resources and the skill sets required. Overall time and cost estimates for physical products, estimates for the cost of goods sold, or COGS.
Okay.
A high-level list of the key project milestones, probably linked to a more detailed schedule. The defined strategy for how the product will be tested and validated. And a summary of any other project costs beyond just the direct people resources.
That gives a pretty clear picture of the logistical side. Now, you also mentioned risk assessment as being a vital part of this plan. Why is that so critical here?
Because things rarely go exactly according to plan. Proactively identifying potential problems before they derail the project is hugely important. It can save enormous amounts of time and money later on.
So what does risk assessment involve?
It means systematically pinpointing the key technical risks, like, is this new algorithm going to work? Are we relying on an unproven technology? Schedule risks, what happens if a key component is delayed? Resource risks, what if our lead developer leaves?
Thinking through the what ifs.
Exactly, and it's not just identifying them, it's also about defining early warning indicators. How will we know if this risk is actually materializing? And, most importantly, developing mitigation plans in advance. What's our plan B if this risk occurs?
Having a contingency plan.
Right. I remember one project years ago where we kind of downplayed a technical risk early on. Ended up causing a massive delay later when it blew up. It was a painful lesson in the value of rigorous upfront risk assessment and planning.
Ouch. Okay, so that covers the development plan in detail. But you also mentioned potentially needing other supporting functional plans. What kinds of things fall into that bucket?
Right. Depending on the product, especially if it's complex or impacts multiple parts of the business, we might need input and preliminary plans from other departments, too. These are generally less detailed than the main development plan at this stage, with more refinement happening later as development progresses.
Like which departments?
Well, if we're launching a physical product, we'd almost certainly need a preliminary manufacturing plan. How will this impact production lines, tooling, quality testing processes? If it's a hosted software product, we'll need an IT operations plan, server capacity, deployment processes, monitoring.
What else?
We might need input from ordering and billing systems, customer support, how will they handle inquiries, distribution and logistics if things need shipping, maybe even coordinating with external partners if they're involved in delivery or support. And as we already said, the marketing plan is almost always its own separate, crucial component handled in parallel.
So these supporting plans aren't maybe super detailed yet, but they're about flagging the impacts and initial needs in those other areas.
That's a good way to put it. They're similar in concept to the development plan. They aim to identify the resources, potential schedule impacts, and costs needed from those departments to support the product's development and eventual launch.
And they might trigger other work.
They definitely can. Sometimes defining these needs highlights that, say, the billing system needs a significant upgrade, which becomes its own separate project within the IT department. And just like the development plan, these supporting functional plans should also include at least a basic risk assessment relevant to their specific area. What could go wrong in manufacturing? What are the risks in scaling the support team?
Wow, it sounds like coordinating all these different moving parts, development, manufacturing, IT, marketing, support, could get really complex really fast. Who typically wrangles all of that?
It really depends on the organization's structure. In larger, more formal companies, you'll often have those dedicated project managers or even program managers whose specific job it is to coordinate all these planning activities across the different departments and make sure the plans integrate properly.
And the product manager's role in that scenario?
In that structured environment, the product manager often acts more as the subject matter expert on the product vision, the requirements, and the market context, feeding that information to the project program manager and the functional teams.
But in smaller companies?
In smaller or maybe less structured environments, the product manager might actually be the one wearing the project coordination hat too, driving that cross-functional alignment much more directly. Sometimes you see product and program management functions reporting into the same department, which can help streamline things.
Listening to all this, it almost sounds like the plan phase itself is a mini project that could really benefit from its own project management discipline.
You are absolutely right. That's a fantastic point. Given the sheer number of deliverables, the PRD or backlog, the UX designs, the development plan, the marketing plan, the business case, and all the resources involved just to create those things, treating the plan phase itself as a distinct project is often a very wise move.
Planning the planning.
Exactly. Creating a simple project charter just for the plan phase, clearly identifying all the key stakeholders who need to provide input or sign off, and assigning clear responsibilities for each deliverable, doing that up front, can prevent a lot of confusion, drop balls, and potential delays later on. It helps ensure everyone's aligned on what needs to be done during planning before you even get to development.
That's a great practical tip. Manage the planning phase like a project. Okay, fantastic. So we've covered defining the product in detail and figuring out how we're going to build it. Now let's delve into the third major activity group, the marketing strategy. What's the focus here during the plan phase?
So the marketing plan activities in this phase are really about taking that initial marketing strategy and maybe the early go-to-market thinking that happened back in the conceive phase and refining it significantly.
Updating it based on what we've learned.
Precisely. Updating it based on all the parallel work that's been happening, especially around the detailed product definition we just talked about and the realities emerging from the project planning. We're also starting to flesh out the more detailed launch strategy itself.
So those initial ideas about, say, who our primary target market segment is, or what our core value proposition should be, or how we position against competitors, those might actually shift quite a bit based on the deeper dive in the plan phase.
Oh, absolutely. It happens all the time. As we conduct more detailed market segmentation, maybe do that deeper user research, analyze competitors more thoroughly, or really validate our product requirements with potential users, we might discover something crucial.
Like what?
Like maybe our initial understanding of the core market need wasn't quite right, or maybe our proposed solution, as initially conceived, isn't going to be as compelling or differentiated as we first thought.
Or the trade-offs made during planning impact it.
Exactly. Those trade-offs we inevitably make, maybe cutting a key feature to meet a timeline, or finding out development costs are higher than expected, those can absolutely influence the overall marketing strategy. What can we realistically promise? What price point makes sense now? So, typical updates you might see here are things like a more precisely defined initial target segment, maybe a revised or sharpened value proposition and positioning statement, and definitely updated pricing strategies and sales forecasts based on this new reality.
Okay, so the core strategy gets refined. And the launch strategy itself, this is where we move beyond high-level ideas and start planning the actual concrete steps for introducing the product.
That's right. We're taking that initial glimpse of a launch plan from the conceive phase and adding much more granular detail. We start planning out specific pre-launch activities.
Like beta testing.
Like beta or pilot tests, yeah. Those often happen in the next phase, the qualify phase, but we plan for them now. The goal is often to gather valuable case studies, testimonials, or user feedback that we can then leverage in the actual market launch. We also define our market validation strategy from a marketing perspective. How will we confirm market acceptance and figure out the associated costs separate from the core development testing?
So what kind of elements would you typically find in this more detailed, updated launch strategy document or plan?
You'd expect to see specifics on things like what marketing collateral needs to be created, brochures, data sheets, website copy, what specific sales tools and product demonstrations would the sales team need to be effective.
Got it. Sales enablement.
Exactly. Plans for social media campaigns, web marketing initiatives, any paid advertising or demand generation programs, sales promotions or launch offers we might consider.
What about PR?
Yep. The public relations strategy, how we'll engage with industry analysts if that's relevant. Plans for participating in trade shows or industry events, or maybe leveraging strategic partnerships for the launch. The detailed strategy for those beta pilot programs we mentioned. And critically, a high-level timeline outlining the key launch milestones and the overall budget allocated specifically for all these launch marketing activities.
Well, that sounds like a really comprehensive blueprint for making a splash when the product is ready. Okay, let's move on to the final major activity group in the plan phase. The business case. What's the main goal here?
The business case activities are really all about pulling everything together financially and strategically. The two main outputs are usually a detailed financial analysis and then an updated overall business case document. This integrates all the planning work we've just discussed and provides the ultimate justification for why the company should invest in this product's development and launch.
So that initial financial projection from the conceive phase, the one that was probably based on fairly high-level assumptions, that gets a major overhaul now.
A major overhaul, absolutely. We're taking those early ballpark figures and evolving them considerably. Why? Because now we have a much deeper understanding of the target market size and potential. We have the specific product features we actually plan to build. We have much more realistic development and launch cost estimates coming out of the project plan. And we have that detailed go-to-market strategy from the marketing plan.
So all the parallel planning feeds into refining the numbers.
Exactly. Typical updates you'd see in this detailed financial analysis would include more precise estimates for the target market size and its expected growth rate, more robust, hopefully validated assumptions about adoption rates and how quickly we expect sales to grow, updated pricing assumptions and the resulting revenue forecast over several years.
What about costs?
Much more detailed projections for the cost of sales or cost of goods sold, the anticipated development costs, and the marketing launch expenses we just discussed, any manufacturing, operational, or customer support costs associated specifically with launching this product, and ongoing operational costs required to sustain it.
And the bottom line.
And ultimately, the bottom line.
Yeah.
Updated profitability calculations, return on investment, ROI, payback period, maybe net present value, NPV, whatever financial metrics the organization uses to evaluate investments.
Now, I can imagine the level of detail and who actually does this financial analysis can vary quite a bit between companies.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. In some larger companies, this might be heavily driven by dedicated financial analysts, with the product manager providing key inputs on market size, pricing, and adoption assumptions. In other places, especially smaller companies, the product manager might be primarily responsible for building the financial model themselves.
And in very early startups.
In very lean startups, it might be less of a formal document and more of an ongoing, iterative spreadsheet model that the founders are constantly tweaking based on new information. But regardless of the format or who owns it, the output of this financial analysis is almost always a critical, major driver in the decision to proceed or not proceed with the product.
But it's still based on assumptions, right?
Yeah.
Especially for new markets.
That's a crucial caveat. While it's much more detailed than the initial projections, it is still a forecast. And forecasting, especially for genuinely new products or in nascent, rapidly evolving markets, is inherently difficult and carries uncertainty. So, while the financial analysis is vital, decision makers should interpret the results with a degree of caution in those highly uncertain situations. Precision doesn't always equal accuracy.
Good point. So we have the detailed financials, then there's the updated business case document itself. How does that differ from the preliminary version we might have created way back?
The updated business case is essentially the executive summary of everything we've done in the plan phase. It pulls together the key findings and decisions from product definition, project planning, marketing strategy, and that detailed financial analysis, and synthesizes it all. It evaluates the entire proposal against the company's overarching strategic goals and priorities.
So it builds on the early version but provides the full rationale.
Exactly. It builds on that initial sketch from the conceive phase, but provides the detailed, comprehensive rationale needed for leadership to commit the significant resources required for the next big step, the develop phase. At the highest level, it needs to answer those fundamental questions clearly.
Like what?
Like, why is this specific market opportunity and our proposed solution worth pursuing over other options? Why do we believe our company has a real competitive advantage here? Why is now the right time to make this investment? And what are the major risks involved viewed within the context of the company's overall investment portfolio?
It's the ultimate pitch document, in a way.
In many ways, yes. It's a comprehensive justification for moving forward.
So what are the typical components you'd expect to find in a well-structured, updated business case at the end of the plan phase?
You typically find sections covering a concise summary of the market need and the size of the opportunity, an overview of the market dynamics and the competitive landscape, a clear articulation of the product's key capabilities, its connection to the overall product vision and strategy, the core value proposition for customers, and how it will be positioned in the market.
Okay, the product and market story.
Right. Then an explanation of how this product leverages the company's existing strengths or assets and aligns with its broader strategic priorities. Summaries of the key development plan and the go-to-market plan. The summary of that detailed financial analysis we just talked about, the key numbers.
Risks, too.
Definitely. An overview of the key risks identified during all the planning activities and potentially the mitigation strategies. And finally, a section covering any significant remaining open issues, the overall conclusions drawn from all the analysis, and crucially, a clear recommendation on whether or not to approve funding for the subsequent develop phase.
That sounds like the critical document that leadership will be looking at very closely to make that huge go or no-go decision for actually building the thing. And before we wrap up our deep dive on the plan phase, you mentioned briefly something about a preliminary product management plan. What exactly is that meant to be?
Yeah, that's often more of an internal housekeeping or organizational tool. Think of the preliminary product management plan basically as a central repository or a binder, maybe virtual these days, for all the key documents and materials that have been generated during the plan phase.
Just keeping everything together?
Pretty much. It serves as a really valuable resource to make sure that everyone currently on the team, and importantly any new team members who might join later, has easy access to the most current versions of the requirements, the plans, the business case, the research findings, etc. It can really help streamline team transitions and onboarding.
That makes perfect sense, avoiding information silos and having a single source of truth for all this critical planning output. Okay, and finally, how do we know when we're actually done with the plan phase? What does it take to officially exit this stage and move on?
Exiting the plan phase really boils down to achieving agreement and formal sign-off on all those key deliverables we've discussed, the ones that clearly define what the product is, and the comprehensive plan for how it will be delivered.
So consensus and approval.
Right. Once there's broad consensus among the key stakeholders, and those deliverables are deemed complete and meet whatever criteria the organization has set, then the funding and resources can be formally approved and allocated for the develop phase to actually kick off.
And the level of detail needed for that sign-off can vary.
As we kind of noted at the beginning, yes. The specific amount and type of information required to successfully exit the plan phase can definitely vary. It depends on the type of product, the size of the investment required, the company's risk tolerance, and the overall organizational culture. But the fundamental principle should always be to provide just enough information based on objective criteria agreed upon beforehand to allow leadership to make a well-informed go-no-go decision for committing to the develop phase.
Makes sense. Get the info needed for the decision, but don't get bogged down in unnecessary analysis.
That's the ideal balance, yes.
So to kind of bring it all together then, the plan phase is really this incredibly intensive period of detailing, strategizing, and validating. It's where that initial spark of a product concept gets put through its paces.
Absolutely. It undergoes rigorous examination, and a truly comprehensive plan gets meticulously developed, looking at it from all angles: product definition, project execution, marketing strategy, and the financial justification.
It's all about transforming that promising idea into a much more concrete, well-defined roadmap for actually achieving success.
Precisely. Hopefully you listening now have a much clearer understanding of this really vital stage. You've got those essential insights, those nuggets of knowledge to truly grasp what happens deep inside the plan phase.
And maybe as you reflect on all of this, here's something to think about. In what ways might the level of detail and, I guess, the rigor applied during this plan phase actually serve as an indicator, maybe even a predictor, of a product's ultimate success or failure, especially when you consider different industries or different types of organizations.
Ooh, that's a good one. Does more planning always equal better outcomes? Or is it context dependent? Definitely something worth pondering and maybe exploring further on your own.
Well, thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us today. We really trust this has given you a valuable shortcut to understanding the complexities and importance of the plan phase.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
And we'd love to know what specific phase or aspect of product development would you be interested in us unpacking in our next deep dive. Let us know.